that is about it. So for those tuning in, we are playing a heavily modified version of The Lost Mines of Phandelver. At this point, our fearless heroes have rescued Sildar Hallwinter from the clutches of evil goblins.
You're welcome, Sildar.
Some of them originally met Sildar in Neverwinter. Actually, I guess everybody met Sildar in Neverwinter. Mm-hmm. Some of you on the streets, he recruited you for a job for somebody he was working for. And the others were approached by that individual, a dwarf by the name of Gundren Rockseeker. He offered you a drink in the local tavern and a proposition of an easy job. You all took him up on this offer and met him in the tavern, as such adventures always start in a tavern. He promised you that there was a very lucrative job on the horizon, but for the time being, he needed a simple favor. He needed you to escort a cart of goods that would be ready on the next day to the local mining town of Phandalin. Phandalin is a small settlement about 4 days away from Neverwinter, a little over a 3 days journey. And it's only been relatively newly reestablished within the last 3 years. You guys decided that this sounded intriguing enough. The price for delivering of the cart seemed easy enough, and he promised that as long as you guys looked the part, there would probably be no trouble along the way. However,
and we totally look the part. All of us.
However, there was trouble along the way, as 2 days into the journey, the cart encountered a roadblock set up by some crafty goblins who were hiding in the bushes nearby, and they attacked our party.
If I might interject, you forgot something very, very important.
What's that?
The cart was pulled by 2 very, very special oxen.
That's right.
It was.
You forgot Sally and Sarfty. Come on now.
Yes, that's important information that the viewers need.
We couldn't have gotten anywhere without those 2 oxen.
Exactly.
We would still be in the tavern.
Right.
Sally and Sarfty are definitely the most important NPCs in the story.
Yes.
My goblins. What?
What?
They were given this name because Arvida requested that they be named, and Gundren quickly spit off a few names, to which Arvida quickly forgot, and when she asked the lady who was the arranged person to get the cart from, she identified the oxen as Sally and Sarfty, and that is now their names.
Forever.
So the 2 oxen did survive the trip, thankfully. Our heroes were attacked by goblins. They had some difficulty identifying the horses. Some of them noticed some identifying markers that linked them to Gundren, but they decided the most important pressing matter was to get the cart delivered to Phandalin, so they headed to Phandalin. Once in the town of Phandalin, they delivered the cart, and they began to learn that disappearances have been happening around the town recently. It seems that the person in charge of the town, the local, as I often mistakenly call him, headmaster, the town master, Harbin Wester, is kind of a not particularly keen on defending his citizens, and just seems kind of aloof in the whole situation.
He's not a very nice guy.
Correct, yeah. When they met with Barthen, who is their contact they were supposed to drop the cart off with, Barthen explained that Gundren was very important and was working on something, and Sildar was supposed to be with him. The party decided at that moment that they were going to go ahead and go try to figure out where Gundren and Sildar disappeared to. They did overhear some conversation that evening in the tavern. One of the local farmers, his young son, had witnessed something particularly odd out in the forest late at night, and the boy is normally not generally upset about things, and he was highly perturbed by this, alerting the party that maybe something was amiss there. So they decided to make their way back to the goblins the following morning, which they did. They They asked Barthen if they could borrow the cart to rescue Gundren once more, and he agreed. And they used the cart to get their way to where they were ambushed by the goblins, and they tracked goblins through the forest to a small cave. And there, they murdered all of the goblins, including the leaders, with the exception of a few who were kind of part of a coup that was starting to happen. The would-be coup leader, Ymik, who had Sildar captive, they traded a favor in disposing of the current leader, a bugbear named Clarg. And they murdered Clarg and took off his head, and Tonk became the new leader of the cave. The joke of the double KO came from that fight in which Tonk killed Clarg with Clarg's killing blow.
Yeah, that's right. It reflected.
Clarg killed Tonk, but Tonk has a ability to discharge electricity into an attacker, and when he was struck down, he finished off Clarg.
Took him with him.
You guys got a hold of Sildar and brought Sildar back to Phandalin. He, after a night of rest in the Goblin Cave, he offered to drive the cart, and he filled you in on quite a bit of history. In the late 800s DR, a clan of dwarves discovered an ancient mine rich with mineral wealth. Deep in the ancient halls, they found an ancient chamber that had some natural magical properties. The dwarves, being clever, found a way to harness this natural occurring phenomenon and created a forge inside of it. This allowed them to craft impressively powerful magical items, the likes of which have not been seen since the end of the Netherese Empire. It is not long before this caught the attention of most local major powers. Soon there was agreement between the elves, the gnomes, the humans, and the dwarfs that everyone would have access to such a thing. And this became known as the Pact of the Phandelver Mind. In the year 951 DR, a massive orc invasion swept across the lands. In its wake, the mine was lost. Phandalin was completely wiped out, and along with many other settlements of the region. The mine and its location seem to have simply vanished from history. However, our patron, Gundren, and his brothers have apparently found an ancient book that contained information as to the whereabouts of the mine. They crafted a map to this ancient mine. Gundren showed me the map, and from what I could tell, it is indeed legitimate. So they have some claim to it, and from what little we do know, the mine at one point was outputting plenty of platinum. So you can imagine why this would be worth pursuing. So that gave our heroic adventurers kind of an idea of the wealth they were potentially looking at in aiding Gundren. But once back in Phandalin, they decided that the weird disappearances that had happened around town seemed to be something that were of the utmost importance. They, with the help of Sildar, had made an arrangement to meet with Harbin, and were pretty much quickly dismissed. Harbin was kind of a jerk to them.
Useless.
He was pretty much useless. Yep.
Yeah.
And after they met with him, Sildar said that he was going to spend the afternoon and the all up until the evening investigating the locals' townsfolk and trying to learn what he could about the town. The heroes offered that they were going to be investigating the old manor house on the outskirts of town, as that's likely a place that somebody might be hiding. But first, they wanted to go speak with the young boy, Carp. They did that, and there were some instances with Carp, and eventually, after playing around with Carp for a little bit, they finally talked their way into him showing them where he had heard these sounds out in the forest late at night. And when they arrived there, there was a carcass of a animal that had been butchered. It seems like maybe that were the sounds that the young boy heard. But the creatures that had done the butchering had taken off towards the manor. So our heroic adventurers ventured deep into the manor. They learned secrets that there was actually an orc invasion that occurred deep in the mines below the manor. It was during this time that one of the last of the noble house, Tresidar, stood his last ground inside the chasm below the manor. And unfortunately, the new residents of the manor, the mine below the manor, are kobolds who have been living there for quite some time. The kobolds have recently been deposed by a group of Zvarts who have pretty much enslaved the kobolds. When our adventurers met both the kobolds and the Zvarts, a small battle took place, and the kobolds sided with our heroes. And unfortunately, they identified the heroes as a threat before the heroes showed up, and they forced a portion of the mine to be destroyed, blocking access to the lower areas so that they could get the eggs out the back tunnels. So, our heroes made their way through the mines below, and eventually they dealt with, it seems like, all of the threats in the mine. They also found a extremely large snake that had taken up roost in the mine, and in its excrement had several bodies of humanoids, roughly adult-sized humanoids. After totally clearing out the mine, they decided to make their way back up. They were greeted with a few spirits from the crypt, who announced their presence as the pre-existing holders of the sword the party is now in possession of, Talon. And they basically identified the blade as belonging to their house and being sworn protectors to defeat orcs in combat. And Arvida is now the owner of the blade. They have bequeathed it to her for saving the group, or not saving group, but removing the filth in the caverns below, as they put it.
It
So
glows
that
blue when orcs are near. It just seemed right.
it's a perfectly appropriate weapon for Arvida.